Hello, this is your host, Tyler Stanley, and welcome to Real Roots, the film podcast where we go back in time and discuss the movies that make movies. The silent era was the first real era of cinema. It was when the industry first started to find its footing, and it's when it branched out from these short silent films that played in shops across the world into bigger, more expensive pieces of media. In our first episode together, I wanted to go back to that time period off the cuff of the 1920s and discuss one of the most influential films that came out during that time. This episode, I want to talk about The Passion of Joan of Arc. Eight years before The Passion of Joan of Arc released nationwide, Jeanne d'Arc, better known as Joan, had been officially canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1920. In an attempt to exploit renewed interest in her story, director Carl Theodor Dreyer was commissioned by the French Film Society to direct this film. With complete creative freedom, Dreyer would create one of the most important and influential films of the silent era. But before we get into discussing this film, let me give a little bit of background. Joan was a French peasant girl who led the French to victory during the 100-Year War while believing she acted under divine guidance. She was captured by the English, who weren't a fan of her claims of divinity. She was tried for heresy, cross-dressing, and most importantly, witchcraft. She was burned at the stake when she was 19 years old. Because of the limitations of the time, Dreyer couldn't really go super in-depth about who Joan of Arc was or what she did. That would be up to other directors years later. What this film does do instead is it takes a very interesting approach to her story by keeping it contained just to her trial. It's a direct account taken from court documents and transcripts from her actual trial, which is considered the primary source for the screenplay. This film is nothing short of horrific, only made worse by the fact that they beat it into you that this was a real thing that happened. It's hard to forget that Joan was only 19 years old during all of this. This film was shot almost exclusively at low angles to put you on the same level as Joan. Whenever it cuts to a judge, the camera is looking up at them, which makes them feel powerful and imposing. Despite there being no spoken words, the physical performances in this are amazing. I can't stop thinking about that scene at the end where Joan stares into the abyss right after being told that it's time for her execution. The only real problem I had with this film was that it reused shots a lot. Despite its pretty short runtime, it still feels like it dragged and that it was doing some pretty heavy padding near the end. There's this scene near the end where Joan was basically bullied into admitting that her visions were demonic and that they'll kill her if she doesn't admit to them. It's this really gross showcase of how much power these men hold over this teenage girl. The judge guides her hand to signing the document of abjuration, which for the time was basically an admission of guilt and a promise that she won't be living in sin anymore. When she gets escorted back to her cell, despite how evil and scary her captives are, she changes her mind and tells them to their faces that she lied to them. It's this really powerful moment of resilience that felt incredibly personal, especially in our modern political landscape. Joan never lost hope and never stopped fighting even when she had every right to. The Passion of Joan of Arc was one of the first real silent films to showcase a highly emotional central performance. It's an incredibly intimate experience, unlike other films of its time that focused a lot on slapstick comedy or horror, making it a definitive film of the silent era. Dreyer would go on to become a pretty important voice in sound film with his film Vampire, but this will always be his magnum opus. Thank you all for listening to my debut episode of Real Roots. I'd love to go into more detail about the history of this film, like how it was censored by the Catholic Church and completely lost until the 1980s when it was discovered in a Norwegian hospital, but we'll have to save that for another episode. If I had to leave you with anything, it's that the silent era was a lot more than just slapstick comedy and cheap scares. The Passion of Joan of Arc is one of the most important films ever, not just to the Catholic Church, but to the evolution of film as a whole. I appreciate all of you who've joined me on this journey, and I'm really excited to talk more soon. Make sure to join me in episode 2, where I discuss with a very special guest an incredibly important anti-war film that revolutionized the talkies in sound film. Make sure to rate or review us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Tylor Stanley, and this is Real Roots. Thank you for listening.